Well, for those who would like to dig into this more, there are really two really important books, in my opinion. The first of them has just been written, The Distinctiveness of Baptist Covenant Theology by Pascal Deneau. Very fine job explaining what the title says, The Distinctiveness of Baptist Covenant Theology.
It puts 17th century particular Baptist federal theology in its context from primary sources and sheds a great amount of light on what the Second London Baptist Confession of Faith means in chapter 7 when it talks about the covenant of grace being revealed progressively and then finally discovered or concluded in the New Testament.
The Distinctiveness of Baptist Covenant Theology is an excellent piece of historical theology. By far the majority did not hold the same view as the Westminster Confession and a traditional covenant theology where you would see the covenant of grace was administered under the Old Covenant in one way, and then it's administered under the New Covenant in another way. They saw distinct differences in not only form, but in substance between the Old and New Covenants. You'll see that in Nehemiah Cox, you'll see it in John Owen, and you'll see it in this book as well.
Perhaps a little bit more difficult, but still essential to read, is this book that I helped to put into print about 10 years ago. In doing my PhD work, I had access to a lot of 17th century writings that most people had not seen in a couple of hundred years, Baptist stuff. And when I read Nehemiah Cox's Discourse of the Covenants that God made with men before the law, I thought it was brilliant and very important. And it's interesting that in the preface to that, Cox says, Nehemiah Cox was the author, he says that he was going to begin to put together materials for a second volume to continue the series in a sense until happily Dr. Owen recently published on Hebrews. And I got the bright idea of taking that material out of Owen's Hebrews commentary and combining it with what Cox had written on the earlier parts of Scripture and forming one book that would deal with covenant theology. And so we published this book, Covenant Theology from Adam to Christ. That was my title that I gave to it. And the first part is Nehemiah Cox's Discourse of the Covenants. The second part is excerpts from Owen's commentary on Hebrews chapter 8. It sets out largely the principles that we have been talking about today. It demonstrates the commonalities between the particular Baptists and the independents or Congregationalists. That's what John Owen was.
Which is very helpful because it demonstrates how the particular Baptists and the federal theology that they constructed was not something that they created out of thin air. They were taking pieces of federal theology in their time and even from theologians before them and constructing it in a way that they thought to be consistent and accurate. And it's very helpful because it is a self-conscious departure from Reformed Paedo-Baptist federal theology in the 17th century and an interaction with those arguments, but it's done in a very Irenic style. It's very peaceful while still being dogmatic.
I think, too, the Second London Confession of Faith is very important, but you have to read it with the right kind of glasses on. And I think Pascal's book and the Cox-Owen volume moves in that direction, but it needs to be fleshed out a lot more in terms of chapter 8, the Christology, chapters 10 through 18 on the various aspects of soteriology, and hopefully that work is being done and will be out at some time in the future.
And then by a particular Baptist, a Calvinistic Baptist, The Fatal Flaw of the Theology Behind Infant Baptism. This one's by Jeffrey Johnson. Excellent second half of the book. The first half's good, okay, but when he gets into the Abrahamic covenant and starts dealing with the dichotomous nature of the Abrahamic covenant, you'll have to read the book to understand that. Just wonderful stuff. Pascal Deneau told me that this book by Jeffrey Johnson, The Stuff on the Abrahamic Covenant, is the closest among a contemporary writer that he's seen, closest to the particular Baptists of the 17th century. Many of our brothers, and I used to be like this. I read Palmer Robertson, I read John Murray, that's what I became. I just threw believer's baptism at the end of it. But about 15 years ago or so, I came across things like this and it challenged my thinking, and then publishing the Cox-Owen book and then reading Deneau really helped as well. And interaction with other brothers. I hope that men will read these books and books like them because I think they're excellent and they challenge a lot of things that I think we've assumed unwittingly.